primarily with a Hindu devotional movement, which is the movement, the Swaminarayan movement, most often perceived to be allegedly fundamentalist, anti-progressive, anti-secularist. Coming from that perspective, that is, of working with the community that is often misperceived, some of the biggest critics of my work have been scholars, intellectuals who fall quite willingly by self-definition into the category of secular liberal theorist. So I attended the two debates, and my impressions coming from the two debates are colored by this perspective of mine. I will confess that the debates were rather disconcerting to me. After the first day, I thought, well, it can't get worse. After the second day, well, you can imagine it, if I'm coming from the first perspective, the second day was almost too much. And so, knowing as well as some of the organizers, I felt admittedly a bit saddened that procedurally things had not quite worked out as the organizers had intended. But coming out of the debate, speaking with colleagues, some of whom are around this table, I came away actually with a very different assessment that I'd like to share with you. Namely that we in the audience were not passive sort of receptacles of what was going on up on the dais. That we too, should we choose, we could be active participants in the non-debate that occurred. And what do I mean by this? Well, it seems that one could take away from the situation that secularists and their critics cannot debate, that they cannot occupy the same dialogical space. If we were to take that stance, then that suggests some seeming impasse, or what is referred to as an aporia. If we feel that secularists and their critics cannot debate, then we're effectively saying that we have reached a moment of aporia, of seeming impasse. And I think that would not be the stance that we would want to take, given the kinds of violence and other sorts of events that have occurred in India and that we've all been preoccupied with trying to analyze. And so what struck me about the secularist stance, and I say this in full recognition that the two members of that side of the debate are not present, that what we can take away from the secularist stance is there's something quite particular to secularism, namely that it offers a very teleological argument, a very universalizing one. It offers a unifying argument, but it also offers some very specific conceptions of personhood, of what it means to be a person. It offers conceptions of persons, in other words. A person should be autonomous, a person should be self-authorizing. There are specific notions of freedom, some of these mentioned by Evan already, freedom, modernity, and progress, all wrapped up, along with the notion of privatization of religion. I'm sure most of you got this sense from the secularist perspective. From the critic's perspective, we only got the sense that there are analytical categories that are highly problematic, namely secularism and, while not so explicit in this particular context, the concept of religion. That these two categories must be critiqued, they must be problematized, and that we cannot sort of willy-nilly use these words without understanding their historical location, development, and so forth. So putting these two pieces together, I realized that though it might seem that there is an impasse, though there was a non-debate, all of us are now in the wonderful position of trying to create some sort of bridge, of coming together and trying to, in perhaps a more dialogical, conversational style, put together the bridge that was somewhat missing in the two debates. Thank you.
When Balu towards the end of last night's session, asked me to participate in this. I was a little bit alarmed because I thought, I don't know when I'm going to have time to think about it because I'm having dinner with some people who have nothing to do with this conference. But it turned out that the dinner was quite instructive because I ended up telling them what had happened. And I said, well, you know, it was about secularism, and debates on that subject do tend to get quite inflamed, and people became hostile and were unable to talk to each other. So my friends at the table said, oh, well, yes, so there must have been some Hindutva types there, and I can understand what would have happened. And so I said, well, no, there were no Hindutva types. In fact, the Hindutva types, the right-wing nationalist Hindu fundamentalism was the opponent of everybody's position. And then in responding to their puzzlement about this, it came home to me how odd it is that given that that is the target of both the secularists and what I will call not the anti-secularists, but the critics of secularism, why is it that they were, at least in this instance, unable to engage in a fruitful, productive debate, since after all the real opponent is the same? Okay, so that's sort of my starting point, and then I started to think about, well, in relation to what they saw in the anti-secularist position as a possible defense of what they would describe as perhaps traditionalism and of religious traditionalism in general. So I thought it was important to maybe make that kind of fear explicit. It's not entirely unwarranted. I think it should be made explicit, and I think it should be addressed. And it occurs to me that the fear occurs on two levels. First of all, it's a fear of traditionalism, generally. And I think what they conceive of as traditionalism is a kind of, shall I say, language game in which people who are traditionalists feel justified in saying that a certain practice, for instance, or set of institutions or social arrangements ought to continue simply because they have been the customary practice within a certain community, or they have been in a different context, in the context of another religion, or that they are revealed, or that they are articles of faith, or they are very ancient, and that's enough. I mean, that's a move you can make within a traditionalist kind of framework where you can appeal to that as a justification. Just that it is a long-standing practice, or that it's the practice of my community, or it's the doctrine of my religion. Now, I happen to believe that, well, what I would call the practical operation of aspects of secular paradigms, and contrary to their intentions, the practical operations of secular paradigms actually incite, encourage, in some cases even compel people to adopt precisely that stance towards their customs, their religions, their communities, their identities. Yeah, so I do think that secularism actually, political secularism, I mean, actually feeds some of the very things that I think that the secularists are afraid of. It actually feeds that kind of traditionalism. But having said that, I think it's fair to be alarmed, to be worried about people making those sorts of moves in which they appeal to their traditions as sufficient justification for the continuance of some set of, well, let's face it, oppressive, unjust, social arrangements in which women are subjugated, quite frankly, and other groups of people are as well. So I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. And I think if the claim is, now I'm sure that yesterday, I mean, Jacob and Balu were not arguing for, were not promoting some kind of return to pre-colonial Brahmanism, right? Nobody wants that. But then I think the onus is on them to say, well, if you allow I can't say religious in this context, but traditional Indian discourses into the public and political sphere, allow them to shape the public and political sphere. It's not going to be that. What will it be? What might that mean? And what might be a possible non-secular or differently secular future that emerges out of that?